The BBC, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times have devoted much of their attention to how Hong Kong police crush protesters fighting for freedom and how China uses national security laws to keep Hong Kong and its liberal values in chains.
That's the problem. Western media paint a totally deceptive picture of the protests in Hong Kong. Let's look at some clips that Western media will never show you.
The violent protesters was assaulting the police officer and trying to grab his gun. The officer fired. However, the Guardian cut the scene of the protesters trying to grab the gun. That is distortion and deceit. It reminds me of the Capitol Hill protester in Washington in January. Western media lauded the police officers as heroes for how they had protected the US legislature. But when a mob violently smashed its way into Hong Kong's Legislative Council complex, the Western media failed to condemn the violence.
I've been interviewed by a lot of Western media. A lot of them doesn't really understand. They're using their feeling or their fear of the Chinese Communist Party. They have their very idea of what the Communist Party is and what Chinese government are, and they don't open up their eye or open up their ears to try to listen to what has been happening.
That's it in a nutshell. Western journalism putting on its finest display of something it does so well: hypocrisy.
But wait, it's not just the way the media covers the story. Documents clearly show the USA behind the chaos, and former White House staff have openly discussed it. Can you imagine the outrage had a Chinese diplomat even thought about joining the Capitol Hill protest?
So Beijing's recent change to the basic laws annexes comes at a time when law and order are desperately needed to safeguard Hong Kong's stability and prosperity.
How do people in Hong Kong feel about the amendments? Can we give it more context?
Let's find someone to talk with.
Mr. Tafan, can you tell us what the amendments are about? Do you think patriots governing Hong Kong is in line with one country, two systems? Critics in the West said the one country, two systems has died. What do you think of it?
There are several issues here. The first one is some Western politicians criticize that China has broken the one country, two system by infringing on the high degree of autonomy of Hong Kong. But I would ask them whether they have read the Basic Law, whether they realize that the Basic Law is a delegation of power, and the decision of the election of the chief executive and the election of the Legislative Council has always been with the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. It was not something within Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy.
How do you interpret patriots governing Hong Kong?
The other thing that they criticize is within this election, using these new election methods, then no democratic candidates could manage to get elected in the coming election. That is simply not true. There are lots of Democrats in Hong Kong who did not go to the United States and ask for the United States to sanction Hong Kong. Many people in Hong Kong believe in democracy, but that doesn't make them the follower of Western power.
The West calls it as a measure to crack down on Hong Kong democracy and loyalty tests. What do you think of it?
A lot of people were saying, well, patriot government is trying to cut off people that have different views. But what has been happening in 2019, 2020 is people having different views couldn't even survive. They were being targeted. They are being punched up, or personal search, personal information were all online.
Some Western politicians also criticize that China cannot have any opposition. Again, people who oppose the government does not necessarily mean that they are unpatriotic, that they will not betray their own country. They would, of course, put emphasis on different interests vis-a-vis the ruling party. But when it comes to national interests, they are all loyal to the national interests. And that's what we mean by patriotic people ruling the country.
The fact that so-called pro-democracy protesters threw their weight behind a campaign of street violence stretching over more than a year is simply ignored. A campaign aimed at crushing the police and overthrowing the government, one that cost massive damage to the community and misery to millions of their fellow citizens. Would Western democracy tolerate such a scheme?
Hong Kong is a part of China, and it remains a world city. History shows that the city only thrived by working with their own country. Hong Kong can no longer wait. With patriots governing Hong Kong, we can expect to see a Hong Kong that continues to be prosperous and where freedom and democracy can thrive under the principle of one country, two systems.